The morning started just like any other Tuesday. Jennifer woke up at 6, made coffee, and began preparing breakfast while her husband Robert got ready for work. Their two kids, 8-year-old Sophie and 5-year-old Daniel, were still sound asleep in their beds. Robert came down the stairs wearing his pilot uniform, the same navy blue jacket with golden stripes that he'd worn for the past 12 years. "Another trip to Portland?" Jennifer asked, handing him a travel mug filled with hot coffee. "Should be back by Thursday evening," Robert replied, kissing her on the forehead. "Tell the kids I love them." This was their routine. Robert was a cargo pilot, flying freight across the country several times a week. The schedule wasn't always predictable, but the family had learned to adapt. Jennifer had stopped worrying about every flight years ago. You can't spend your life anxious about something that happens hundreds of times without incident. Flying was safer than driving, everyone said. Robert loved his job. He'd dreamed of being a pilot since he was a little boy, and now he was living that dream. Robert grabbed his keys and flight bag from the counter. "I'll call you tonight when I land," he said, giving her one last quick hug before heading out the door. Jennifer watched through the kitchen window as his car backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. She sipped her coffee and started making pancakes for the kids. That was the last time she saw her husband alive. By 7 that evening, Jennifer was starting dinner when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer it, thinking it might be a spam call. Something made her pick up. "Mrs. Collins." The voice on the other end was professional but tense. "Yes, this is she." "This is James Henderson from Regional Air Cargo. I'm Robert's supervisor. Ma'am, I need to inform you that we've lost contact with Robert's aircraft." Jennifer's grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean, lost contact?" "The plane disappeared from radar approximately 3 hours ago, while flying over the Rocky Mountains. There was a severe storm in the area. We've already contacted search and rescue teams. They're preparing to deploy at first light tomorrow." The words hit her like a physical blow. Jennifer sank into a chair, her legs unable to hold her weight. "But there's a chance he's okay, right? Maybe it's just a communication problem." The pause on the other end told her everything she needed to know. "We're doing everything we can, Mrs. Collins. Someone will be in touch with you regularly as we get updates." That night was the longest of Jennifer's life. She couldn't tell the kids yet. What would she even say? Sophie and Daniel went to bed thinking their father was safely flying somewhere over the mountains, probably eating a sandwich and listening to the radio. Jennifer sat on the couch, phone clutched in her hand, waiting for news that never came. The next morning, search helicopters took off at dawn. Jennifer's phone rang constantly. Robert's parents, her parents, his co-workers, friends. Everyone wanted updates. Everyone wanted to help. But there was nothing anyone could do except wait. Days passed. Then a week. The search teams covered hundreds of square miles of mountainous terrain. The weather had been terrible that night, with high winds, heavy rain, and low visibility. Robert had been an experienced pilot, but even the best pilots can't fight nature. The mountains were vast and unforgiving, covered in dense forests and steep cliffs. Jennifer finally had to tell the children. Sophie was old enough to understand, and the look on her daughter's face when she heard the news would haunt Jennifer forever. Daniel was confused. "When is Daddy coming home?" he kept asking. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that his father might never come home? 2 weeks after the disappearance, the official search was called off. They'd found nothing. No wreckage, no debris, no sign of the aircraft. It was as if the plane had simply vanished into thin air. The airline's representative came to the house to explain the situation. Without physical evidence, they couldn't make any definitive statements. Robert was officially listed as missing. Missing, not dead. Not alive, just missing. That word became Jennifer's prison. Missing meant she couldn't move forward and couldn't let go. Missing meant that every time the phone rang, her heart would leap, thinking maybe it was him. Missing meant sleeping in an empty bed, knowing her husband was out there somewhere but not knowing where. Missing meant watching her children grieve for a father who might still be alive. The months crawled by. Jennifer went through the motions of daily life like a robot. Get the kids to school. Go to work, make dinner, help with homework. Put on a brave face. Cry alone in the shower where no one could hear. Sophie stopped smiling. She threw herself into her schoolwork, getting perfect grades but losing all interest in friends and activities. Daniel started having nightmares, calling out for his daddy in the middle of the night. The airline eventually made a financial settlement with the family. Jennifer hated accepting it. Taking the money felt like giving up, like admitting Robert was gone. But she had 2 kids to raise and bills to pay. The money went into a trust for Sophie and Daniel's education. Jennifer couldn't bring herself to spend a single dollar of it on anything else. A year passed, then 2, then 5. Jennifer attended support groups for families affected by aviation accidents. She met other people trapped in the same awful limbo, people whose loved ones had disappeared without a trace. Some of them had given up hope. Others clung to impossible dreams of survival. Jennifer fell somewhere in between, moving through life with a constant ache in her chest. The family created their own rituals of remembrance. Every September, on the anniversary of Robert's disappearance, they would visit a small memorial stone they'd placed in the cemetery. It was just a marker with Robert's name and date sitting above empty ground. They'd bring flowers, share memories, and try to feel something other than emptiness. But nothing helped. Not therapy, not time, not well-meaning friends telling her she needed to move on. How could she move on when she didn't know what she was moving on from? Was Robert's body lying in some remote ravine waiting to be found? Had he suffered? Did he think of them in his final moments? The not knowing was torture. And as the years continued to pass, Jennifer began to accept a painful truth. She might never know what happened to her husband. Some questions don't have answers. Some goodbyes never get said. Sometimes people just disappear, and the ones left behind have to find a way to keep living anyway. Life moved forward whether Jennifer wanted it to or not. The world didn't stop spinning just because hers had fallen apart. Bills still needed paying. Kids still needed raising. Somehow she had to figure out how to be both mother and father to 2 children who were drowning in their own grief. Robert's closet became a shrine she couldn't bring herself to touch. His pilot uniform still hung there, pressed and ready as if he might walk through the door any day and need it for his next flight. His shoes were lined up beneath it. His cologne sat on the dresser, the bottle gathering dust. Sometimes Jennifer would open the closet door just to smell his clothes, hoping to feel close to him again. But with each passing year, even his scent was fading away. Sophie was 15 now, 7 years after her father disappeared. The cheerful little girl who used to dance around the house had transformed into someone Jennifer barely recognized. Sophie rarely smiled anymore. She buried herself in textbooks and homework, maintaining perfect grades but avoiding any social activities. Her teachers called her a model student. Jennifer knew better. Her daughter was using academics as armor, a way to avoid feeling anything at all. "Don't you want to hang out with friends this weekend?" Jennifer asked one Friday evening. Sophie didn't look up from her chemistry homework. "I have a test on Monday." "I need to study." "You always have a test." "Honey, you're allowed to have fun sometimes." "I'm fine, Mom." The words came out flat, emotionless. Sophie had become an expert at shutting down conversations before they could go anywhere meaningful. Daniel was 13 now, a skinny kid who'd grown tall seemingly overnight. He played basketball at school and was actually pretty good at it. Unlike his sister, Daniel seemed to be doing okay on the surface. He had friends. He laughed. He acted like a normal teenager. But Jennifer knew the truth. Daniel barely remembered his father. Most of his memories were constructed from photographs and stories, not actual experiences. One night, Jennifer found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at an old photo album. "Can't sleep?" she asked, sitting down beside him. "I'm trying to remember him," Daniel said quietly. "Like, really remember him, but I can't. I remember the pictures, but I don't remember the actual person. Does that make sense?" Jennifer's heart broke a little more. "You were only 5 when he left. It's okay that the memories are fuzzy, but Sophie remembers everything. She talks about things Dad said, places he took us, stuff they did together. I don't have any of that." He closed the album. "Sometimes I feel like I'm supposed to be sad about losing someone I never really knew." This was the cruel reality of losing someone when you're too young. Daniel had been robbed not just of his father, but of his memories of him. No amount of photos or stories could replace actual time together. Every September, the anniversary brought everything back to the surface. It became an annual wound that never quite healed. Jennifer would take the kids to the cemetery where Robert's memorial stone stood. They'd place flowers on the ground and stand there in awkward silence, each lost in their own thoughts. What do you say to a gravestone that covers empty earth? "Do you think he's really under there?" Daniel asked once. "No, honey. This is just a place for us to come and remember him." "Then where is he?" Jennifer had no answer. The truth was somewhere in those mountains, lost in the wilderness, probably covered by years of snow and fallen trees. But she didn't say that. Instead, she just held her son while Sophie stood apart from them, arms crossed, staring at the stone with unreadable eyes. The financial settlement from the airline had been substantial. Jennifer had put every penny into trust funds for the kids' education. She couldn't touch that money for anything else. It felt like blood money, a price tag on Robert's life. She went back to work full-time as a nurse, taking extra shifts when she could. Staying busy helped. When she was working, she didn't have time to think, but the nights were the hardest. That's when the loneliness hit her like a freight train. She'd lie in bed, staring at the empty space beside her, wondering what Robert's last moments had been like. Did he know what was happening? Was he scared? Did he think about her and the kids? The airline had eventually declared Robert legally dead. They had to, for insurance and legal purposes. But legally dead isn't the same as actually dead, at least not in Jennifer's heart. How could she accept that he was gone when there was no body? No proof. No closure. She tried grief counseling. The therapist was nice enough, but what could she really say? Time heals all wounds, they told her. But this wasn't a wound that could heal. It was more like a piece of her had been cut away, leaving a hole that nothing could fill. Jennifer joined a support group for families of aviation accident victims. Meeting others who understood the unique pain of losing someone in a plane crash helped a little. There was something comforting about being around people who didn't need explanations. They got it. They knew the special kind of torture that came with not having answers. But even in that group, her situation was unusual. Most of the other families had recovered remains, had been able to hold proper funerals, had gotten closure. Jennifer was stuck in limbo, and she started to wonder if she'd be stuck there forever. 10 years passed. Then 11. Sophie was applying to colleges now, writing essays about overcoming adversity. Daniel had grown into a confident young man who wore his father's old watch, the only physical item he had from him. Jennifer had started to let herself think about the possibility of dating again, though the guilt that came with that thought was overwhelming. On what would have been Robert's 52nd birthday, Jennifer found herself standing alone in front of his memorial stone. The kids had other commitments that day. Sophie had a college interview. Daniel had basketball practice. Life was moving on, pulling them all forward whether they were ready or not. "I don't know how to let you go," she whispered to the stone, "but I don't know how to keep living like this either." The stone, of course, offered no answers. It never did. Jennifer placed a single flower on the ground and walked back to her car. Maybe some questions weren't meant to be answered. Maybe she'd have to make peace with never knowing. Maybe this was just how her story would end. But fate, as it turned out, had other plans. It was a Tuesday morning in early October when Jennifer's phone chimed with a new email. She was at work, halfway through her nursing shift at the hospital, grabbing a quick coffee during her break. She almost deleted it without reading. The subject line looked like it could be spam, but something made her pause. Regarding Captain Robert Collins. Please read immediately. Her hands started shaking before she even opened it. 11 years of hoping and dreading had conditioned her to fear unexpected messages. The sender's name was unfamiliar. Thomas Wright. She didn't know anyone by that name. With trembling fingers, she tapped the email open. The message began with an apology. Thomas explained that he was a commercial airline pilot who frequently flew routes over the Rocky Mountains. He was also an amateur photographer who loved capturing landscape shots from the cockpit during flights. Last week, he'd been flying through a corridor he'd flown hundreds of times before, and something caught his eye during the golden hour of sunset. Jennifer's heart was pounding so hard she could barely focus on the words. She skipped down looking for the point, and then she saw it. Thomas had attached a photograph. Her coffee cup fell from her hand, splashing across the break room floor. She didn't notice. She couldn't take her eyes off her phone screen. The photo showed a mountainside steep and covered in patches of snow and dense forest, but there, partially hidden by vegetation and what looked like years of accumulated debris, was something unmistakable, the tail section of an aircraft jutting out from the terrain like a grave marker. Thomas wrote that he'd zoomed in on the image when he got home and noticed markings on the tail. He'd spent hours researching missing aircraft in that region, and found records of Robert's plane. The identification numbers seemed to match. He'd already reported the coordinates to the National Transportation Safety Board and the FAA, but he wanted to reach out to the families directly. He knew they'd been waiting a long time. Jennifer couldn't breathe. After 11 years of nothing, here it was, proof, evidence, a location. She read the email 3 more times, each time thinking she must be misunderstanding somehow. But the words didn't change. The photo didn't change. Her supervisor found her sitting on the break room floor, tears streaming down her face, phone clutched to her chest. They sent her home immediately. Jennifer sat in her car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to compose herself enough to drive. She needed to tell the kids. She needed to call someone. She needed to process what was happening. But her mind was spinning too fast to land on any single thought. She drove straight to Sophie's school and pulled her out of class. Sophie came to the office looking annoyed, probably thinking her mother was overreacting about something minor again. But when she saw Jennifer's face, her expression changed instantly. What happened? Is Daniel okay? He's fine. Everyone's fine. Get in the car. We need to go pick up your brother. Mom, what's going on? You're scaring me. Jennifer handed her daughter the phone, the email still open on the screen. She watched Sophie's face as she read, saw the moment understanding hit. Sophie's hand started shaking just like Jennifer's had. Her eyes went wide, then filled with tears. Is this real? Sophie whispered. I think so. The pilot reported it to the authorities. They're going to verify the location. They picked up Daniel from school next. He climbed into the back seat confused and worried, thinking someone had died. In a way, someone had. 11 years ago. But now, finally, they knew where. Jennifer pulled into an empty parking lot and turned to face both her children. I need to show you something, she said, passing her phone to Daniel. Sophie moved closer to her brother so she could see the screen, too. The car was silent except for the sound of Daniel's sharp intake of breath. That's Dad's plane? We think so. They're sending people to check. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Years of grief, confusion, and unanswered questions hung in the air between them. Then Sophie started crying. Not the quiet, controlled tears she usually allowed herself, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Daniel put his arm around his sister, his own eyes red and wet. Jennifer climbed into the back seat and pulled both her children close. They held each other and cried in that parking lot for almost an hour. People walked by, going about their normal days, having no idea that inside that car, a family was finally beginning to understand what had happened to someone they loved. By the time they got home, Jennifer had 3 voicemails from the NTSB. They'd verified Thomas Wright's report and confirmed the coordinates. A recovery team was being organized. The location was extremely remote and difficult to access, which explained why search efforts 11 years ago had missed it. The terrain was steep, heavily forested, and at a high elevation. The initial storm that night had apparently buried the crash site under snow almost immediately, and over the years, nature had covered it further. They asked if Jennifer wanted to be present during the recovery operation. She didn't even have to think about it. Yes, she said. I need to be there. Sophie wanted to come too. Daniel wasn't sure. The idea of seeing the crash site, of confirming in the most concrete way possible that his father was really gone, felt like too much. Jennifer told him he could decide later. No one was going to force him to do anything he wasn't ready for. That night, the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table, the email pulled up on Jennifer's laptop. They looked at the photo together, really studied it. After 11 years of imagining, of wondering, of torturing themselves with possibilities, they finally had something solid. Not answers to all their questions, but at least a place to start. How did we never find this before? Daniel asked. They searched for weeks. The mountains are huge, Sophie said quietly. And the weather was terrible. They did their best. Jennifer reached across the table and took both their hands. A pilot we've never met took a photo at exactly the right moment. Out of hundreds of flights he's done, he happened to look at the right mountainside at the right time. And instead of ignoring what he saw, he investigated. He reported it. He found us. Do you think Dad would want us to go there? Daniel asked. I think your father would want us to finally have peace, Jennifer said. And I think this is how we get it. 2 days later, Jennifer received confirmation. The recovery team would deploy within a week. She could accompany them to a base camp location. After 11 years of waiting in the dark, they were finally going to bring Robert home. The helicopter ride to the base camp was the longest 40 minutes of Jennifer's life. She sat pressed against the window, watching the Rocky Mountains spread out below like an endless sea of peaks and valleys. Somewhere down there, hidden among all that wilderness, was Robert. Sophie sat beside her, gripping her mother's hand so tightly it hurt. They'd left Daniel at home with Jennifer's sister. He'd decided at the last minute that he couldn't face seeing the crash site. Jennifer understood. Everyone had to process grief in their own way. The base camp was a collection of tents and equipment set up in a small clearing. The recovery team was already there, preparing their gear. Jennifer counted about 15 people, maybe more. Technical climbers, investigators, medical personnel, all of them here because one pilot had taken a photo at the right moment. The team leader, a woman named Patricia, came over to greet them. She had kind eyes and spoke in a gentle but professional tone. "Mrs. Collins, I want you to understand that this is going to be a difficult process. The terrain is extremely challenging. It's going to take us at least 3 days to reach the site safely and conduct the recovery." "I understand," Jennifer said. "We just need to be here," Patricia nodded. "You'll stay at base camp. We'll keep you updated every step of the way. And Mrs. Collins, I want you to know that we're going to treat your husband with the utmost respect. We know what this means to your family." That first day felt endless. Jennifer and Sophie sat in camp, drinking coffee that tasted like dirt, watching the team prepare their equipment. Ropes, harnesses, medical supplies, body bags. That last item made Sophie turn away, her face pale. This was really happening. After 11 years of abstract grief, they were about to face the concrete reality of death. The recovery team set out before dawn on the second day. Jennifer watched them disappear into the forest, their headlamps bobbing like fireflies in the darkness. Then there was nothing to do but wait. She and Sophie played cards to pass the time, but neither of them could concentrate. They'd start a game and forget whose turn it was. Eventually they gave up and just sat there staring at the mountains. Around noon, the radio crackled to life. Patricia's voice came through, broken up by static. "We've reached the site, confirming it's the cargo plane. Registration matches. Beginning documentation process." Jennifer felt her knees go weak. Even though they'd known, even though they'd seen the photo, hearing the official confirmation hit different. Sophie buried her face in her hands. This was it. The plane they'd been searching for. The answers they'd been desperate for all these years later. The radio stayed mostly quiet after that. Occasionally they'd hear brief check-ins as the team worked. Technical language about coordinates and procedures. Jennifer tried not to imagine what they were seeing up there, what state everything was in after 11 years of mountain weather. Some thoughts were better left alone. On the third day, Patricia's voice came over the radio with an update that made Jennifer's heart stop. "We've recovered personal effects. We'll be bringing them down today." Personal effects. The word sounded so clinical, so detached, but Jennifer knew what they meant. Pieces of Robert's life. Things he'd had with him in those final moments. She wasn't sure she was ready to see them, but she also knew she needed to. The team made it back to camp late that afternoon, exhausted and covered in dirt. Patricia approached Jennifer and Sophie with a sealed bag. Her face was solemn. "Mrs. Collins, we recovered these items from the cockpit. They've been documented and cleared for release to you." Jennifer took the bag with shaking hands. Through the plastic, she could see familiar shapes. A watch, a wallet, a wedding ring. She'd seen Robert wear these things 1,000 times. And now here they were, returned to her like messages from another world. "There's something else you should know," Patricia said quietly. "Based on our investigation, both pilots died on impact. It would have been instantaneous. They didn't suffer." The words were meant to be comforting, and in a strange way they were. For 11 years, Jennifer had tortured herself imagining Robert trapped in the wreckage, alone and in pain, knowing that he'd died quickly, that he hadn't suffered through hours of agony waiting for help that never came, lifted a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Sophie was crying silently beside her. "Can I see?" she asked, gesturing to the bag. Jennifer opened it carefully. The watch was Robert's favorite, a simple silver piece he'd worn every single day. The wedding band was scratched but intact, and the wallet still held his pilot's license, a photo of the family from years ago, and a receipt from a gas station dated the day he'd left. Sophie pulled out the photo with trembling hands. It showed all four of them at Daniel's third birthday party. Robert was holding Daniel on his shoulders, both of them laughing. Sophie was making a silly face. Jennifer was smiling at the camera, pregnant with joy that now felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. "He kept this in his wallet," Sophie whispered. "He looked at this picture all the time." Patricia gave them space, stepping back to let them process. Jennifer held Robert's wedding ring up to the light. She'd given him this ring on their wedding day 17 years ago. She'd slipped it onto his finger and promised to love him forever. She'd kept that promise. Even when he was gone, even when everyone told her to move on, she'd kept loving him. That night, back in their tent, Sophie curled up next to her mother like she hadn't done since she was a little girl. "I'm glad we came," she said quietly. "I'm glad we're here." "Me too, honey. Do you think Dad knew? At the end? Do you think he thought about us?" Jennifer held her daughter close. "I think your father loved us more than anything in the world. And I think that love was the last thing on his mind." They lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind move through the mountains. Somewhere out there, the recovery team had found what was left of Robert Collins. The not knowing was finally over. Tomorrow they would begin the journey back home, and this time, Robert would be coming with them. The next morning, as they prepared to leave base camp, Jennifer saw Thomas Wright standing near one of the tents. The pilot who'd taken the photo had come to see the recovery through. She walked over to him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two strangers connected by one impossible coincidence. "Thank you," Jennifer said, and the words felt completely inadequate. "You gave us something we thought we'd never have." Thomas's eyes were wet. "I almost deleted those photos without looking at them closely. Something told me to check one more time. Whether it was fate or luck or divine intervention, Jennifer would never know. All she knew was that this man's decision to look twice had changed everything. After 11 years in the dark, they finally had their answers. And more importantly, they could finally say goodbye. 3 months after the recovery, Jennifer stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her black dress. It was January, cold and gray outside, but inside the house there was a strange sense of calm. Today they would finally lay Robert to rest. A real funeral. A real goodbye. After 11 years of waiting, they could finally close this chapter. Daniel came into her room wearing the suit they'd bought him last week. He looked so grown up, so much like his father. In his hands he held Robert's recovered watch. "Mom, can I wear this today?" Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "Your dad would have loved that." The funeral home was packed. Friends and family who'd attended the memorial service 11 years ago were back again. Older now, but still there. Robert's fellow pilots came in uniform, a sea of navy blue and gold stripes. Jennifer saw faces she hadn't seen in years. People who'd called and sent cards in those first terrible months, then gradually drifted away as life moved on. But today they'd all come back. Thomas Wright was there too. The pilot who'd taken the photo stood near the back of the chapel, looking uncomfortable but determined to be present. Jennifer had invited him personally. He'd tried to decline, saying this was a private family moment, but she'd insisted. "You're part of this story," she'd told him. "You're part of bringing him home." The service was simple. Jennifer had asked the pastor to keep the religious parts brief. Robert hadn't been particularly religious, and it felt wrong to pretend otherwise now. Instead, they focused on memories. Friends shared stories about Robert's terrible jokes and his obsession with fixing things around the house. His parents talked about how he'd dreamed of flying since he was 6 years old. Sophie read a letter she'd written to her father, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Dad, I've spent 11 years being angry that you left," Sophie read. "Angry at you, angry at the universe, angry at everything. But I understand now that you didn't leave us. You were taken from us. And there's a difference. You would have come home if you could. You would have been at my school plays and my soccer games and my high school graduation. You would have helped me pick a college and taught me to drive and walked me down the aisle someday. You wanted all of those things as much as we did. So I'm not angry anymore. I'm just grateful I got 8 years with you, even if I wanted a lifetime." There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Jennifer watched her daughter, amazed at her strength. Sophie had carried so much pain for so long, and now she was finally letting it go, finally allowing herself to grieve properly and then heal. Daniel spoke too, though his words were shorter. He talked about wearing his father's watch and looking at old photos. "I wish I remembered him better," Daniel said honestly. "But my mom and sister have told me so many stories that sometimes I can't tell what's a real memory and what's a story I've heard 100 times. Either way, I know he loved us. And I know he'd be proud of who we've become. At least I hope he would be. When it was Jennifer's turn to speak, she almost couldn't do it. She stood at the front of the chapel, looking out at all those faces, and felt the weight of 11 years crash over her. But then she saw Sophie and Daniel in the front row and she found her voice. Robert was my best friend, she began. He was the person I told everything to. The person who made me laugh when I was sad. The person who knew me better than I knew myself. Losing him was like losing a piece of my soul. And not knowing what happened to him, not being able to say goodbye, made it so much worse. I've spent 11 years in limbo, unable to move forward but unable to stay still. Today, finally, I can do what I should have been able to do 11 years ago. I can say goodbye. I can tell him that he was loved. That he is loved. That he always will be loved. She paused, looking at the casket. And I can tell him thank you. Thank you for the years we had together. Thank you for our beautiful children. Thank you for every morning coffee and every goodnight kiss and every ordinary moment that I took for granted at the time. I would give anything to have you back. But since I can't, I'll settle for this. A proper goodbye, and the knowledge that you're finally at peace. After the service, they went to the cemetery. The memorial stone that had marked empty ground for 11 years now had meaning. They lowered Robert's casket into the earth while a pilot friend played taps on a trumpet. The sound echoed across the cemetery, mournful and beautiful. Jennifer held her children close as they watched their father finally come home. At the reception afterward, Thomas Wright approached Jennifer hesitantly. I keep thinking about how close I came to missing it, he said. I take that route dozens of times a year. I've flown over that exact spot probably 100 times. But that one day the light was different. Something caught my eye. If I'd flown an hour earlier or later, if the sun had been at a different angle, I never would have seen it. Jennifer took his hands. But you did see it. That's what matters. You saw it and you didn't ignore it. You investigated. You reported it. You found us. My family will be grateful to you for the rest of our lives. I just wish I could have found him sooner. 11 years is a long time to wait. It was, Jennifer agreed. But we have answers now. We have closure. That's more than a lot of families ever get. Over the following weeks and months, something shifted in the Collins household. The heaviness that had hung over them for so long began to lift. Sophie smiled more. She started hanging out with friends again, even going to parties on weekends. She'd been accepted to a good university with plans to study aerospace engineering. I want to make planes safer, she told Jennifer. I want to help prevent what happened to Dad from happening to other families. Daniel joined the basketball team and actually seemed to enjoy it. He made friends, went on dates, acted like a normal teenager. He still wore Robert's watch every day. But now it felt less like clinging to the past and more like carrying a piece of his father forward into the future. Jennifer took Robert's pilot uniform out of the closet for the first time in 11 years. She donated it to the Aviation Museum downtown, along with his logbook and photos from his career. They created a small display honoring his memory. Other pilots who visited the museum would see his story and know that he'd loved flying right up until the end. She started dating again, cautiously. A man from her grief support group who understood loss in a way most people couldn't. It felt strange at first, disloyal even. But Sophie and Daniel encouraged her. Dad would want you to be happy, Sophie said, and Jennifer knew it was true. On what would have been Robert's 53rd birthday, the three of them went to the cemetery together. They brought flowers and stood in front of the headstone. But this time, the visit felt different. Less like visiting a wound and more like visiting an old friend. Hi, Dad, Daniel said, touching the stone. We're doing okay. Better than okay, actually. We miss you, but we're not stuck anymore. We're moving forward. I think you'd be proud of us. Jennifer watched her son, remembering the 5-year-old boy who'd asked when Daddy was coming home from his long trip. That little boy had grown into a young man who understood that sometimes the people we love don't come back, but their love stays with us anyway. As they walked back to the car, Jennifer looked up at the sky. A plane was passing overhead, leaving a white contrail across the blue. She watched it until it disappeared into the clouds, and she smiled. 11 years of grief had ended not with forgetting, but with acceptance. Robert was gone, but he'd left them with something that could never be taken away. He'd left them with love, with memories, and with each other, and somehow that was enough.